Welcome to the Whiskey Explorer. Thanks so much for tuning in for another episode tonight, guys. And we have got an interesting bourbon here for you. We have got the Thomas S. Moore finished in Chardonnay casks. Alright, so this one here is coming from 1792 Distillery, also known as Barton 1792. And the namesake for this bourbon, actually, Thomas S. Moore, he's actually the founder and creator of Barton, so it's definitely a very fitting bottle for that. So this bottle here is sort of meant to celebrate his legacy as kind of one of the original whiskey barons of the Kentucky whiskey scene back in the day. And this here has been finished then for what they actually say is several additional years in Chardonnay casks. So on the back of the bottle here, it actually does describe what he did in the bourbon industry, mostly about founding 1792. And then it goes on to say that it's made of select casks of very well-aged whiskey, and then additionally aged in Chardonnay cask for several more years. So that's kind of interesting because normally a wine cask finish or a finish of pretty much any type is not going to be finished for several years. It would be more like several months. So we don't actually know how many years, so we don't really know what that means, but nonetheless, that's what they're claiming on the back of the bottle there. So this here is bottled at a strange proof of 97.9 proof, which actually translates to 48.95% ABV. So just interesting that they put the two digits there. Normally they would just round that for the ABV to, well, I guess they'd have to round it to 49%. But anyways, there you have it. This is the bottle. It's actually a really attractive looking bottle. Kind of different. It's almost like an Art Deco, a very straight up and down, squared off design. So definitely a bit different than what we typically see in the whiskey world. And these ones here, I will say this is kind of a brand that has kind of flown underneath the radar, didn't have a lot of popularity, so let's see if there's any good reason for that when we go into the review on this. Alright, so we'll have a look at the color in the glass here. So it's definitely actually a really nice kind of rich mahogany tone, so it's very, very kind of dark and sort of tending towards the kind of reddish hue as well. I was already getting like a pretty big nose just from holding it up to the camera there, so this is definitely going to, I think, have a pretty impressive nose. So let's go in for a nosing without further ado. Cheers. It's got a very interesting nose to it. It kind of reminds me of like cherry pipe tobacco. Almost like, you know what, it's interesting. I didn't chew tobacco or anything, but I had some buddies back in the day that did, and I kind of remember smelling their tins of like, chewing tobacco, and it kind of has that hint to it, like that kind of sweet tobacco note mixed in with cherry. Definitely getting some vanilla in here as well. And there's definitely also a strong oak note right in the kind of middle of the nose palate there. Nose palate, that's trademarked, so just so you guys know. All right, so giving it a quick kind of turn around the glass here. Let's go in for a sip. On the palate, cheers. Okay, started off pretty good. Typical cherry forward kind of palate from the outset there, mixed in with some vanilla, which was quite nice. Mid palate, you get this really weird funky note. I wouldn't even really describe it as a wine cask. It's more of like an akavit or something like that, like a very strange kind of distilled spirit. Pretty out there, honestly, in terms of flavor. I think if you do enjoy this whiskey, this is going to be like an acquired taste, or maybe it's for someone who really enjoys wine, but you definitely get that wine influence. It smacks you right in that mid palate, and it's very strong. And the other thing that I noticed right away when I took a sip was very drying. So it has that effect that bourbons can sometimes have where it sucks all the moisture out of your mouth, but that happens sometimes like later on in the dram with a whiskey. This time it happened like immediately. It was like very drying, just right off the hop. So not my favorite sipping experience there. Very, very strange palate, especially in the mid. The start of the palate was actually pretty good. Typical flavors of cherry, vanilla, maybe a little bit of caramel and butterscotch, but we'll definitely go in for a second sip here to give it another try. So on the second sip, guys, cheers. Okay, so that strange flavor that I got in the middle was perhaps less noticeable on the second sip. I think my palate had a chance to acclimate. It's not super high proof or anything, but that funky flavor in the mid palate is so strong and kind of dominant that, you know, I do think that it shocks your palate when you're not kind of expecting it or not used to it. On the second sip, it didn't bother me as much. Definitely, it's almost like if this bourbon tasted like the beginning palate all the way through, I think it would actually be a really good bourbon. So lots of kind of the dark cherry, vanilla, sweeter bourbon notes you're already familiar with and that you want to find in a bourbon. A little bit of cinnamon as well as brown sugar, so definitely some pleasant notes in the beginning. And then that mid palate, that weirdness kind of comes in. Very strong, almost like a strong kind of fortified wine, maybe like a port or something like that. I don't quite get like Chardonnay, but I certainly can taste the wine influence. There's definitely like a grape-based flavor to the center palate. And then that grape kind of wine note is mixed in with a strong oaky presence. And it is a little bit of an astringent oak, so there is also the potential, especially seeing as they're saying on the back of this bottle that it spent several years in that secondary cask. It could just be that it was in the cask too long, and the result is it's quite oaky. So again, it does coat the mouth a little bit, so there is some mouthfeel here, but it does also really suck all the moisture out of your palate. So that's kind of what I'm finding in this dram here, guys. I would recommend. This is not a buy for me. I would recommend if you are curious about this brand. I really like almost everything that I've had from 1792. It's been fantastic. So I was definitely curious to try it out with a wine finish. So if you are curious about it, I would highly recommend you try a bar pour or someone who you know who has it already, rather than kind of dropping the money on this. I think they were a little on the pricey side too. I think they ran around $75 US, and so far as I know, not available here in Canada. So that will pretty much wrap up this review, guys. Until the next time, may your sails be full, your drams be fuller. Cheers.